Okay. Tash Dile, and good evening to all our speakers and to our lovely live audience tuning in from across the world. Welcome to the virtual event of Freedom Hour, an online discussion hosted by the Asia Freedom Institute, which is a non-profit organization that calls for democracy and religious freedom in Tibet and China. I'm Sakina Butt, the moderator for today's discussion. And today we will be talking about one of the most important topic, a topic that the world should be aware of: Belt and Road Initiative, China's effort to create a new world order. And to speak on this topic, we have Niva Yao, non-resident fellow at Global Hub Atlantic Council, Dr. Prashant Kumar Singh, head of East Asia Cluster at the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, and Dr. Tenzing Late, research fellow at Tibet Policy Institute. A very warm welcome, dear panelists, to AFI's discussion. And I would like to tell our viewers that I have kept the introduction of our speakers really short to save some time for our discussion. And if you want to get the full introduction of our speakers, you can always go to Asia Freedom Institute's website, where you will find the entire bio of our speakers there. And before I start, let me quickly run you through the agenda for today's event. Initially, we will be starting off with two general questions for each of our speakers, followed by two rounds of individual questions. And finally, we will have one general question for each of our speakers again. And all of our speakers will have 3 minutes to give your answers. And without further ado, I would like to begin with the first general question. So we all know about the recently held 10th anniversary of China's Belt and Road Initiative, a signature initiative of Xi Jinping, where the Chinese financial institutions have lent close to $1 trillion to finance infrastructure projects all across the developing world. The Chinese government has declared that more than 150 countries have participated or have embraced the Belt and Road Initiative. Can you tell us, has China's trillion-dollar initiative been a success? Niva, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me and part of this panel with different experts to talk about this topic. I think that we have been thinking about the Belt and Road Initiative for a long time already, and the discussion itself has changed over time. This year when we are thinking about the Belt and Road Initiative, it has moved on beyond the topic of infrastructure, which was the main focus of a lot of people, mostly when they talk about the Belt and Road Initiative. But as we know, the Belt and Road Initiative has a lot of phases. And being that infrastructure is the one phase that people like to talk about the most, and to make the strongest association with, when we want to assess the Belt and Road Initiative, we start with infrastructure, right? So let's look at what these infrastructure projects have turned out in the past 10 years. Many of them that were proposed in 2013 were actually never implemented. Those who have been implemented are controversial. The Hanban-Tota port, for example, is one classic case study that at this point many people know about. But it also is important to look at the projects that have not been implemented, because they are also controversial. For example, all the Belt and Road projects in Malaysia, the East Coast Rail Link, the Malacca Gateway, which all of this ended in this famous, infamous corruption case of a former head of state, Najib, in the 1MDB. So none of that was implemented in Malaysia. Even then, created a lot of controversy. Now, that's at the infrastructure level, at the project level. Now, if we look at the country level, the countries which are the forefront of the Belt and Road Initiative, would be Kazakhstan, where it was meant to be connecting Central Asia to the rest of the world. Central Asia being a landlocked region, that's where the Belt and Road Initiative started. The idea started from there. Well, now when we look at the way that Kazakhstan cooperated with China in the past 10 years, we actually see that Kazakhstan did not increase their trade engagement with other countries other than China. The promise was that, Kazakhstan would be able to use the Belt and Road Initiative, the railway and at the border hub, the dry port, Korgos, the flagship BRI project. So the idea was that Kazakhstan was supposed to use that port and export to, other economies in East Asia like South Korea and Japan. But this never happened. In fact, trade between Kazakhstan and Japan actually decreased in the past 10 years. So, if we look at just purely what China has promised, it has not been fulfilled for countries that have participated. And this is, one of the strongest evidence in our assessment.
Thank you so much, Niva. Dr. Prashant, let's hear your perspective.
Oh, thank you, Sakina, for inviting me to share this platform. Whether BRI has succeeded, I will have my own nuance point on this. We have to look at the level of narrative, influence, that whether it has extended any influence, and the commercial aspects. So as far as narrative is concerned, I think it has fairly succeeded. It has succeeded largely in the global south, developing countries, where China has been somehow able to project itself as a stakeholder in development and global development. There, I would say that they have succeeded. The simple fact that more than 150 countries, 152, I think exactly, have some in some form or other have embraced it or endorsed it. Dozens of MOUs have been signed, and around 3,000 projects are running all over the world wherever it has reached in the targeted countries. So and it's now 1 trillion project. So we cannot say that it has not succeeded. And also apart from this 1 trillion figure, this BRI projects, we should also look at the volume of OFDI, overseas foreign direct investment by China. Now it is running in more than 150 billion dollar, and it started from a very low base. And now it is, I think, number 1 or number 2. I am exactly forgetting the rank. It's a OFDI provider as an individual country. So this BRI was basically, in its commercial form, was all about exporting excess surplus and excess capacity. And if we look BRI in the context of China's increased OFDI, so it looks that it has largely succeeded. But of course, there are bottlenecks. I will not say that it has seen some pushback in the large scale projects. Some projects have been cancelled, some projects have been suspended, and some are facing some other issues. So so those things are there. But if we say it's on the whole, I think it has achieved fair success, and the statistics speak volume of it. And then if you look at, as I said, as a narrative, if you look at narrative, it's foreign policy narrative as a foreign policy organizing principle of China. So I would say, I would give credit to the Chinese government. They have pushed it successfully, and they have somehow projected as a basically interested in global stakeholder in global development. And if you look at when it was convened, it was initiated in 2012. We should recall that it came as a response, perhaps as a response to other initiatives like TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, etc. The Trans-Pacific Partnership. So if we compare with those initiatives, and we do not know what is happening to the TPP, but BRI is still there, and we are debating and discussing. So I feel that it has succeeded in a fair amount.
Thank you. Tinsulatullah, let's hear your perspective on this.
Sure. First of all, I completely agree with both the speakers' point. How Neva has pointed out how China could not able to produce on some of the promises that it made on investment regarding in regions that it had made promises. And also, I completely agree with Dr. Prashant on how, he has explained on how China was success in terms of, bringing out the best in its, investment and through BRI, of course. But at the same time, I would say that it is very difficult as a question to measure whether BRI is a success or not, and whether to give you a concrete yes or no question. Why? Because there are different layers to this question. When we are asking whether BRI is a success or not, I think there are questions involving whether BRI is a success in terms of economy, whether BRI is a success in terms of diplomacy, whether BRI is a success in creating this positive image, or what we call soft power, or whether BRI is a success in the overall a promotion of this so-called China dream and China life. What we see is that economically, China has gained some some level of success in terms of extending its economic corridor and maritime corridor through BRI to regions that before BRI, China doesn't have access to these regions. But through BRI, we see that China has gained those access in regions like Africa, in regions like Latin America and Oceania. But at the same time, what we see is that from BRI, there is a very clear message that BRI is not a charity. BRI, as Dr. Prashant mentioned earlier, is purely investment. That means that China expects country to return back what they have lent, what they have taken loan from China. Right? So what we see is that the debt trap is being called debt trap. There are poorer countries that could not able to pay back what they have taken loan from through BRI. But at the same time, what we see is that through this extensive lending and borrowing of loan from BRI, what we see that it has added to to China's economic slowdown. It has added to the rising unemployment issues within China itself. So what we see is that whether it is a success or not, there's also always a question of we see that there are international communities like US and the EU and India, for instance, are involved in bringing out their own projects as a challenge to the BRI. With US, it brought out what we say, bring back better world, B3W. And EU very recently brought out this initiative called the Global Gateway. It's a direct challenge to BRI. India, for that matter, very recently, it came up with a different corridor, which is called India, Middle East, Europe Corridor, IMEC, right? So these initiatives, we see that these initiatives are direct challenge to BRI. So whether we call BRI a success in terms of economy or in terms of diplomacy or in terms of creating a soft power, in terms of creating an image, when you see that trend, whether BRI is a success or not, is still a question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ladula, and thank you so much to all our speakers. Niva has pointed out how the promises are not being met by the recipient countries. Dr. Prashant spoke about the success of BRI, and Dr. Tenzin Ladula have made a really important point regarding the debt trap, and that BRI is not a charity, but BRI is purely an investment. And you've spoken about the challenges that the Belt and Road Initiative also brings along. So let's talk about the costs and benefits now. In your perspective, can you share about the costs and benefits for the participating countries, because we have seen that some of the countries have benefited from this Belt and Road Initiative, but there are other countries who have experienced cost outweighing the benefits. So can you tell us about the seriousness of this issue? Because there are concerns about countries falling into debt traps, like Tenzin Ladula had mentioned. And there are other concerns related to corruption, environmental degradation, and economic coercion. So besides these, are there some other concerns that participating countries need to be aware of before they enter into the BRI financed project? Niva, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. I actually we've covered a lot actually just in the first a couple of minutes on the two frames of understanding BRI, and this is absolutely the right track that we're on. And I just want to add that exactly, this debate about success is a very difficult debate because there are so many things that are happening at once within the BRI and within China's foreign engagement. But I think perhaps one of the cases that can illustrate this quite clearly is the fact that I just want to bring back the case of Malaysia never being that integrated part of BRI. At the same time, the head of state at the time, Najib, was signing on a lot of deals. Although the deals never materialized, the thing that materialized was his personal gain. And apart from his personal gain, the factor that actually materialized was Malaysian foreign position on South China Sea. At the time when the Philippines were filing the court case, Malaysia actually made very minimal reaction to that. And at the same time, they were having their airspace and the maritime space, violated by the Chinese side. Even then, they made very little reaction. I think this shows, I think the extent of corruption and how much the Belt and Road Initiative and such image can have on leaders, and then decide they can trade off national security concerns and national interests. So I think, what I'm trying to say, especially in the framework of this question, is that both China and host countries, have a role to play in these successes and failures. A lot of the times, the role of the host country, actually is very important, whether or not they can resist the temptation of corruption, whether or not they buy into China's narratives. I mean, of course, the Chinese side is always spreading, their narratives of the Chinese model of growth and so on and so forth. But how come some countries are buying into that? How come some countries actually believed in that? Is the big question, because we see China very clearly selling, through the Belt and Road Initiative, this narrative that loans can be given out without conditionalities, without reforms, without sustainable feasibility assessments of projects. Now, this is all an idea that China is selling to these countries based off of its own supposedly domestic experience, that they took on a lot of Western technology and investments without much of domestic reform. So this idea that China is selling through the BRI have been successful in some countries and not others. Many have started to believe that this is possible, but then obviously when the investments eventually came, they didn't see the miracle that China promised.
Thank you, Neva. Dr. Prashant, let's hear your perspective.
Yeah, there are lots of questions about BRI. There are no doubt about it. And particularly major countries like, I would take India's name first, because India was the first country to raise so many questions about this, and I think, with reasonable success. So major countries like India, the US, Japan, they have, and other countries, so the concerns have emerged from those countries. And the questions have been raised about debt trap and the financial sustainability, and concerns for the environment. And we see that, I will give some example of that. We have in this UK basically made a sort of announcement. Probably they may embrace it, but they backtracked. And Italy formally joined, but then I think they are also having second thoughts, or they have resigned it. That I'm not up to date, but yeah, that's an issue. But if we look at some other countries, as Neva was mentioning, that I think they are not very concerned about those issues. If you look at the narrative coming out from Sri Lanka, Nepal, or some other countries, and these countries are basically, if they are scholars, not the government, or some of the responsible voices, have been saying that it is Indian discourse, not our discourse. So how would you account for that? So we have to look at, basically from this point of view, that the countries need money for their development, and money is coming from China, and they are getting it. And then the point is whether there are fear of debt trap. There have been analysis for that, but there is no yet conclusive evidence, because lots of agreements, the agreements China has signed with these countries have this confidentiality clause. So exactly what are the conditions? These are not officially known, but there are concerns. There are concerns because today the debt trap we may not see, but 10 years, 15 years down the line, exactly what is the nature of the conditions maybe suddenly become known sometime 10 years or 15 years down the line. That's a concern. And another concern is this, and many of these countries which have basically vocally and very openly embraced this BRI are conflict or instability ridden countries, for let's say in Africa, and how BRI is playing its role there, and what is the future of BRI there. This is, it's a concern. And but again, and then there is a pushback from within China also, that many of these projects are really very long term. Their digestion period is very long. So what would be is the end profit for China? Chinese are also having doubts about it. And in fact, in last few years, last 2 or 3 years, this investment under BRI has gone down, has gone down. So they are also reassessing. And now in this the recent summit that has happened, we see a distinct shift, that they are probably shifting towards smaller scale projects, though they are carrying out some large scale projects also. But as a policy level, they have announced that they would prefer now small and beautiful beautiful projects. And there are decisions regarding the making that these projects more financially sustainable, that has been taken in China, and also more environment friendly, because now they are talking about green BRI, greener BRI. So the feedback has reached to them also, but how they will adjust and whether that adjustment will be successful, we have to see. And we have to see all these adjustments alongside the GDI, Global Development Initiative, in which we are seeing that there is a focus more on projects which are aligned with SDG, uh, Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, smaller scale projects on innovation, green technology. So whether this BRI will in the future, in coming years, will transform and subsumed in GDI, or it will remain there as a distinct identity supportive to the GDI, we have to see. We have to see. Its challenges are there, and I would say that probably Chinese are also receiving the right feedback and trying to readjust and reassess the situation.
Dr. Ladula, let's hear your perspective.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Dr. Prashant.
So when we are talking about whether how to measure the cost and benefit of BRI, again this is a very difficult question for us to state a clear answer to it. Precisely because I think BRI itself is changing. It is not constant. It changes in its contours. It changes in its not objective, but it changes in the number of regions that it include in becoming a part of BRI. But also, I did raise the issue of debt trap. But I should make it clear here that personally, I don't think debt trap has been intentionally laid by China. By stating that I'm not promoting, or I'm not, I'm not having China in its propaganda. Of course not. But I think that it's very important for us to understand that this debt trap has been actually the consequences of both the countries that are involved in BRI and China itself. Why? Because China is actively engaged in huge expansion of its investment, investing in infrastructure across the world, that it actually were involved in sort of like a spendthrift. It was involved in providing loans without proper screening, without checking whether that country, the country that is receiving the loan, has the capacity to return back that loan, whether that country has the logistics to return that loan. So as I mentioned earlier, that BRI was never a charity case. It was purely investment. It was purely commercial. So China expects those countries to return back those loans. That is why we see that countries like Kenya and Zambia And Pakistan, for instance, were sort of like were left with those issues of returning back those huge loans to an extent that Pakistan now, which is the principal receiver of BRI, that the CPAC initiative, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is actually the largest receiver of BRI's loan. That now in 2020, what we see that Pakistan's engagement with BRI has fell down to 74%. And also, so that is the telling case of actually what we see is that the countries that are involved in BRI are receiving those, are facing those issues. At the same time, what we see is that there are a number of countries that has also, cut off their relations with BRI. For instance, Turkey, Poland, and Kenya has completely, cut off its relations with BRI, which says that these countries will not engage with BRI on any terms. But at the same time, what we also see is that what we also see is that there is a rising sort of like internal economic issues within China, especially after pandemic. We see that there is a rising concern within China that China is is involved in giving out loans to countries that cannot return those loans, as well as regions where BRI is involved. For example, in Africa, what we see is that BRI has become an issue. Why? Because China was involved in bringing their own migrant workers to work in Africa, and that the unemployment issues in Africa was never addressed in BRI project as well. So these are the rising issues, Nick. But again, Sakina, you have also asked me the question that what are the environmental impact or issues involved in BRI? I think that is very important in order to raise here in this session. In terms of environment, what we see is that Xi Jinping is highly involved in promoting this so-called carbon neutral China, right? So he supported this idea. But what we see is that in promoting this carbon neutral idea, China is involved. BRI is involved in electric vehicle producing electric vehicles, sort of like products and all. So in order to produce electric vehicle products, China is heavily involved in a mining sector, metal mining sector. And what we see is that there's a huge increase in China's involvement in mining, to an extent that what we see in Tibet also, with electric vehicle, they need resources like lithium and graphite. And what we see is that regions like in Tibet, what we see is a huge number of resources in terms of lithium. And China is actively engaged in unrestricted mining of these resources. And that is why we see human rights violations as well. That is why we see the huge economic impact of BRI.
Thank you so much to all our speakers for giving us your insights, your personal insights about the challenges that comes along with the Belt and Road Initiative. And Dr. Laduna, you've spoken about the human rights violations. We will delve more into that later. So now we will move forward with the first round of individual question, and I will start with Neva. So, Neva, you have made the argument that the BRI cannot be seen in isolation or as an end in itself, but it should instead be viewed as a first step and in conjunction with other Chinese government efforts towards the fulfillment of the Chinese dream, such as the Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, and Global Civilization Initiative, etc. What is China and the CCP's end goal here? What does it want to achieve with its policies, and why is the Belt and Road Initiative necessary for this goal? Over to you, Neva.
Thank you. And of course, when we are talking about, what is this bigger picture scenario that Beijing has in mind doesn't mean that it will be successful, right? So we have to first keep that in mind. It might not be successful, but what we are talking about is what they are thinking, what they are trying to achieve, what are the objectives, and what is it for. I think a lot of that, we have to look at it first from a domestic perspective. For many years, the Chinese Communist Party, holds dear to its legitimacy over economic growth. The way that they praise themselves, the way that they praise success of certain leaders in the party was always embedded on economic figures. That is something that is evident in policy papers. But when Xi Jinping came to power, we start to see this shift away, because obviously they cannot rely on economic figures anymore when the Chinese economy started to decline. So what the leaders in Beijing have started to talk more about in recent years is amplifying this sense of nationalism and promoting a Han Chinese identity, whatever that means, in real terms. And this sense of nationalism plays a lot into foreign engagement as well, which is why we see a lot of these rise of warriors, Chinese ambassadors worldwide who are making very outrageous statements that actually runs counter to their purpose of diplomacy. And so, the Belt and Road Initiative and all these other initiatives that have recently come about should be understood as the Chinese Communist Party way of legitimizing itself by proposing these grand schemes. Because to the domestic audience in China, they don't know what's going on overseas, especially with censorship. They don't know what's happening. But what they hear is that, Xi Jinping is doing a good job because he's doing this Belt and Road Initiative. He's doing this global security initiative. And the way that these initiatives are described in the domestic Chinese discourse is that it's a success. And that is something that the party uses to legitimize itself. So, and so this is, the primary goal of how these foreign initiatives are being used. But then at the same time, if these initiatives were to become successful, which at the end of the day is more about setting the norms and values of the global order in order to secure the regime of the Chinese Communist Party. And what does that mean? That means primarily is to deflate international criticisms of what China is doing domestically. And we can think of, a lot of cases, from what's going on in Tibet, in Xinjiang, and in Hong Kong, and to even just how the Chinese government is treating their own people, not talking about, ethnic minorities or regions that have more autonomy. So all of this, is interlinked. And I think, this is something that, as a framework of understanding what BRI is, if we start from here, if we start from this understanding of, okay, China wants to increase their legitimacy, using nationalism, then we can predict what else is going to come in the next 5 to 10 years. Based off of this need to build a stronger image of the Chinese civilization, we will see a lot of Russian initiatives and rationales coming from that will create other initiatives and dictate behaviors of Beijing. And of course, if we think from that perspective, then what can we say about Taiwan? What can we say about South China Sea? I think then the answer will be much more clear.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Niva. And moving on to Dr. Prashant, you've studied China's ideological evolution post-Mao and analyzed the influence of Xi's dream on China's foreign relations and security postures. In what ways has the BRI been influenced by China's shift from Mao-era communism to a more nationalistic and economically expansive approach under Xi Jinping? Dr. Prashant.
Thank you, Sakina. I would simply shortly say that this BRI Belt and Road Initiative is another name of China's economic expansion and economic expansionism. And this economic change that we have seen in China in last 40 years have been basically closely linked with China's evolution from Maoist to non-Maoist and Tangist Tangist era and close the Tangist era, and that ideological evolution we have seen in China, that how China has basic with this economic opening up and reforms and moving towards market economy or state capitalism, Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics. So whatever you say that has required new source of legitimacy, in which my previous speaker Nivai Yao basically indicated towards that nationalism has been reinvented, rediscovered. So this entire political, ideological, and economic project are going hand in hand in China. And this the BRI, when they have basically announced the BRI, by then they had made tremendous progress in the economic sphere. And if we look the ideological makeup and mindset of China, they have moved far beyond the Maoist days. So that was the time when China was looking for achievements, striving for achievements, and basically was, what should I say, that they were waiting for declaring their arrival, and that process had started 2008 onwards. And by that time, 2013, when it was announced, so they were confident enough to declare that they were no longer meekly accepting the world to accommodate them, but they were in the position to offer something to the world. And it's this surplus and excess capacity that was in their hand came handy to move in that direction. And now basically what if you look at this Xi Jinping's entire nationalistic project, so in which basically they are linking, the Chinese are seeking to declare itself as a geopolitical equal of the US, as a responsible global power, and as a country which has stakes everywhere in peace, prosperity, and development everywhere in the world. And so BRI, in a way, has become a vehicle to those aspirations, and it is showing there. And if we look at from the domestic politics point of view, so basically it is also telling to the public through BRI that now they are the country which have something to offer to the world, and they are being seen as the leader in many parts of the world. So that way, I would say that the BRI, which is basically extension of Xi Jinping's Chinese dream in the economic realm, in economic foreign policy realm, is an important vehicle of Chinese nationalism internationally. I see the linkage between the BRI and Chinese nationalism in that way.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prashant. And moving on to Dr. Tenziladula, you have researched on the strained relationship between China and EU relations in the aftermath of COVID-19 and after China's position on the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So in your view, how has the perception of China and the view of BRI has changed after the COVID pandemic and after China's stance on the Russia and Ukraine war, particularly in the EU and among countries in Central and Eastern Europe, and also globally? Can you also clarify the role and objectives of China's 17+1 initiative within this context?
So I think before I answer, there's a two-part questions to it. So before I answer the previous one, I think I'll touch what is 17+1. It's quite simple though, but it is 17+1 means 17 European countries which are members of the BRI, and plus one is China, right? So so today, as we speak, there are 17 European members who are part of the BRI, in which there are 8, in which I would say more number of the countries, of the European countries, are from the 27 member of the European nation. There are 5 Balkan states. So including Greece and Italy, now it makes 17 plus 1. It was initially called 16 plus 1. After Italy became part of BRI, it became 17 plus 1. So this 17 plus 1 is the extension of the flagship of BRI, you can say. So it is the Xi Jinping's notion is that reviving China's old age Eurasian relation with Central and Eastern European countries, and this was first conceptualized in 2012 in Budapest. It was before BRI was actually initiated. So so the objective also, when you look at the objective of the BRI itself, it's very clear that BRI is not a it's not an economic project alone. It's not an economic initiative alone, because the objective itself shows that it is much larger than that. It looks, to me, it looks almost like a foreign policy, China's foreign policy itself. Why? If you look at the objectives of the BRI, it says that objective is that it's not only to extend trade relations with the countries, it's all the objective of the BRI is also to increase people-to-people connection. It is the objective is, of course, it did not say political, but it has a huge political connotation behind it, huge political impact of the BRI we have seen. But also what we see is that to address the first question as well, has the perception of the Europeans changed after Ukraine war and pandemic? I think it's very evident from it that after the Ukraine war, before Ukraine war, what we see is that the number of the European countries that support BRI and the number of European countries that support BRI after Ukraine has a dramatic sort of like a trajectory. It has a dramatic decrease in it, because after Ukraine, what we see is that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was essentially supported by China, was essentially supported by Xi Jinping. And it's not only that, but we see is that both Putin and Xi Jinping shared a sort of a partnership which has no limit. What they say, partnership with no limit, friendship with no limit. So you can see that Putin's invasion of Ukraine involves a huge sort of like a political boost from China, I would say. And that is why we see that the Europeans are now hesitant about the motives behind China's BRI. And we also see that, especially after pandemic, where we see that Europeans have a lot of sort of like issues and questions regarding how China has addressed this pandemic, how China has initially approached Wuhan virus, how China has not led independent researchers and independent delegates to actually visit the place and led the delegations to address Wuhan virus. So these are not just that, but we have also seen human rights violations. We have seen doctors who are involved in addressing these issues are being condemned in China. So, I mean, and this doesn't just stop there, but there are issues, issues like a lot of, not a lot of, but some of the European countries who are member of the BRI has stopped their relations with China, has questions about BRI. For instance, Czech Republic, for that matter, Czech Republic president, he sort of skipped the 9th summit of the BRI, the BRI meeting, and some of the Central Eastern European countries has also refused to attend BRI, event in 2020. To the extent that we see that Lithuania, very recently, Lithuania has quit its relations with China. Lithuania has quit its participation from 17+1. has quit its participation in BRI. So we have seen the sort of impact of the Ukraine crisis as well. And this impact has, I would say, is increased after Israel and Palestinian issues as well, because we have seen sort of like a block mentality between China and the West in terms of addressing these issues, in terms of addressing Ukraine issue, in terms of addressing Israel-Palestinian issue. So we have seen this sort of like a block mentality that there is a China-centric sort of like a region grouping, there is a Western-centric grouping. So, which is, I mean, that is why I would say that the perspectives coming from the European countries have changed dramatically from. If I were to again express the same, I would say that the European Union itself, its relation with China has changed exponentially, especially after 2019. What we have seen is that the European Commission, for the first time, they came out with a joint communication in which they have, called out on China as the systemic rival to the existing world order, which Niva has explained earlier, that it is now the potential challenge to the existing world, Western-centric world order. It is coming up with alternative world order. So what we see is that the officials of the European Union are in itself involved in challenging the BRI, in challenging China-centric, economic, initiative.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ladonla. Now we will move on to the second round of individual questions, starting with Niva Yao. In a recent opinion piece, Niva, you've said that China's global vision inevitably builds on the foundation of its domestic policy approach. As Beijing steps up its push for its global agenda, its domestic problems could give rise to unpredictable challenges elsewhere. Countries that are binding themselves ever closer to Chinese initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative could reach a point of no return with the traditional order. Niva, can you explain this?
So I think, a minute ago this is essentially about grouping. This is about grouping. I mean, countries can no longer play both sides. I mean, it just isn't happening. It just isn't possible anymore. And this is not just at an ideological level, but also at a practical level. You have to take a side, because with a lot of these issues, it's getting to a point where it's impossible to keep working with China and expect that you still get treated right in the international system. For example, in the economy, there are two issues. The first one is industrial standard and adaptation of Chinese technologies. Once you have your national basic infrastructure system with the Chinese fingerprints all over it, this is a massive amount of dependency that you have built in your country, that it will be extremely costly for you in the future if you decide to adopt non-Chinese technologies. And many countries simply will not be able to afford that switch, because opting for Chinese technology is because it was cheap to begin with. So this is the first thing. You build yourself this long-term dependence on China. Now the second thing is loans. How many countries can take these unlimited loans from China and expect to still get bailed out by multilateral financial institutions? Sri Lanka is getting some sort of a deal, this year, but we have to see how this actually materializes, because how many countries can actually, enjoy these privileges, and can we continue to bail out countries who have made poor decisions, with Chinese loans? Now, this is in the space of economy. Now, in military, this is actually, becoming a much more of a concrete issue. I just spoke about, industrial standard and, adaptation of Chinese technologies in the telecommunication sector. This is extremely important, because the Chinese fingerprints in your telecommunication sector, especially in critical assets such as ports and radars and radio systems, this has a direct impact on the host country's relations with other partners like US or Japan, just purely because of having information leaked or obtained, by backdoor through these Chinese access to these telecommunication systems. This is something that has been written a lot about in the past couple of years, not just by the US but also by the EU side. We're not just talking about developing countries in Asia or in Africa or Latin America. We're talking about within the European Union. There are so much Chinese investments in these critical port infrastructure to a point where we've seen EU reports written about how this can directly impact NATO mobilization communications. Now, this is in the Baltics. Now, if we have this going on in Europe, what does that mean for elsewhere? Particularly when we're talking about Taiwan Straits, for example. How will these sort of U.S. mobilization be impacted? If countries were to continuously adopt Chinese technologies, now this is where what we mean by point of no return, because it's extremely costly and time consuming to roll back on all these decisions, both practically and also financially. So in this decade of intense U.S.-China competition, is important. Countries take a side, because when you don't take a side, you actually you get ever more isolated in the global system.
Thank you so much, Niva, for talking about long-term dependency and also talking about how countries are dependent on China for industrial and Chinese technologies. Thank you so much for making that really important point. And moving on to Dr. Prashant. Dr. Prashant, considering your expertise in Chinese and Taiwanese affairs and the broader context of East Asian geopolitics, could you elaborate on the strategic implications of China's investment in critical infrastructure through the Belt and Road Initiative in the Indo-Pacific region? Because this region is crucial for international trade and sea lanes, right? So how do you think India should counter China's growing influence, and what strategies should be implemented to safeguard its interests in response to the BRI? Over to you, Dr. Prashant.
Yeah. And although I do not see BRI as international conspiracy by China, a huge economic initiative such as BRI, which is trying to convey the message of inherent Chinese greatness and goodness, is bound to have diplomatic and strategic implications, if not consciously, but certainly in the process. We have seen that it's about money, it's about financial heft. And I would focus here on South Asia. We have seen that till around 2005, China was hardly vocal on South Asian countries' domestic affairs, and it was shy on taking positions and making positions on domestic issues. But by the year 2005 or so, we see that Chinese interests, economic interest in this region, began picking up, began deepening, and after that time, we see that China gradually began becoming vocal or taking some positions on domestic issues in South Asian countries. And now in last years, in decade or so, that we have seen that China is extremely vocal, and Chinese scholars are vocal. Chinese media, which is either government run or affiliated with the government in some form, they are very vocal. Their diplomats are very vocal. They make their positions known. They issue statements, and we have seen that in this region, in South Asia. South Asia is a case study for your question. We have seen that in this region, and from the point of view of India's interest in this region, in the countries of this region, basically anti-India constancies. India is a big country and we have smaller neighbors, so every neighbor is bound to have different strengths in politics, and there are political constancies in the neighborhood which somehow do not feel comfortable with us, or they have a position which are at variance with us. We feel that they have been emboldened and they are emboldened, and they are making the cause, or they are taking side with China in last years. So we see different these are diplomatic challenges that are coming with Chinese money in the region. And then we are seeing that so many projects, particularly Gwadar, and I would not say about the projects in Sri Lanka, but I would say the Gwadar port, which are causing some military concern also, because they are dual use projects. As of now, they are for commercial and civilian purpose, but in the long run, we do not know in what direction they will go. So some of the Chinese money that is coming in the region, and that is coming more in volume with the BRI, is bound to cause these type of concerns and challenges to India. And Southeast Asia is just a case study, and this you can replicate in every region. Of course, China will be there, but in place of India, you can replace some other country there. So there is somewhere is Japan, somewhere is the US, and some other countries that have got big countries that have got concerns with the Chinese influence. So these are very legitimate concerns. There are very much political, diplomatic, and strategic implications of this development. And with the economic heft of BRI, these implications will become even more serious. There is no doubt about that. Then, but what should India do? So the question is, India has to become part of the developmental regions development, and it should prioritize its immediate region where it has got more at stake. It has got more stakes in the neighborhood region, and it should do it. It should develop a regional development policy, and it should partner with the like-minded countries and pool the resources and try to fill the developmental void in these countries. It could be in South Asia, Eastern Africa, some countries in South Asia, wherever India has the reach and the stakes. So, because lastly, we should not forget that Chinese are trying to fill the void in development in those countries. And if we want to check negative implications of that attempt, we also project ourselves as a development provider. Either we should do it alone wherever we can, or we should do it together with the Japan. For example, that we had Africa Asia growth corridor, we have at now, and how vibrant it is and how effective it is, there's a different matter. But as a policy level, we announced, and recently we have announced India, Middle East, Europe corridor. These are right intentions, right policies, and these policy frameworks should be further refined, and we should be part of many more such international initiatives. But the point is money. The countries with India, Japan, and America, maybe Australia, you name it, whichever country you want to name it, they should come together with some resources and try to provide and try to emerge as an alternative development provider. That much I would say. That is the only way we can counter the negative aspects of the BRI. We should be really worried about the negative aspects, potential negative implications of the BRI.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prashant, for pointing out really important points as to how India should counter China's growing influence in regard to the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, moving on to Dr. Ladula. As an expert on human rights issues related to Tibet and relations between China, Tibet, and India, how do you connect the BRI initiative and China's objective behind this initiative to the fundamental issues of repression of human rights and the absence of freedom in China, Hong Kong, East Kyrgyzstan, Tibet, and Southern Mongolia? In other words, why should Tibetans, Uyghurs, Hong Kongers, and other human rights activists follow what the Chinese government is doing through the China's Belt and Road Initiative? Over to you, Ladula.
So I'll be very brief since we have very limited time. I think BRI has a direct impact on Tibetans, Uyghurs, Xinjiang, and even to Taiwan. And when we are speaking of Taiwan, For instance, in 2022, in January, a country like Nicaragua, who was initially have a diplomatic relations with Taiwan, has joined BRI in January 2022, a month before it officially severed all its ties with Taiwan. That is a huge issue. Now, the number of diplomatic relations, the countries that have diplomatic relations with Taiwan, has been decreasing since then. And what we also see is that it's a huge concern for all the human rights defenders as well. It's not just Tibet or Taiwan or Hong Kong, but all the people who actually believe in human rights. Why? Because in 2022, what we see is that 60 countries have signed statement calling the UN, United Nations Human Rights Chief, to respect China's internal matters when the Xinjiang issue was being called upon. So it's quite unbelievable. It's quite surprising to see that. I mean, 60 number of countries believe that China should respect from the human rights violations that it is committing within Xinjiang or Tibet or Hong Kong. But it's not only that, it's not just a concern, but it's also a huge concern for, I mentioned earlier, how environment issues has been a concern for Tibet when China is through BRI, when China is involved in producing these electric, vehicles, that they need a more number of, more resources, lithium resources from Tibet. But also what we see is that now through BRI, China is involved in, digital economy, in which we have seen they're involved in investing in surveillance technologies, and this has a direct impact in regions like Tibet, in where we have seen a huge number of mass collection of DNA from within people to surveil, sort of like there is a huge sort of like a surveillance system that is being built within Tibet and in Xinjiang as well. So these are, these surveillance systems has been pushed and has been, been sponsored by a number of, engagement and the economic engagement that is being, promoted and supported by BRI. So, which is why I think, I believe that even for Tibetans or Xinjiang or Uyghurs or Hong Kongers, BRI has a direct, impact and influence to, even to human rights defenders.
Thank you, Latuna, for raising these really important points. And and I request our speakers, we are going for a final round of general question, and I request our speakers to please limit your answers to 2 minutes because we have already exceeded our time limit. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to start with Neva. So, according to you, how has the Belt and Road Initiative evolved since its inception in 2013? Because in a white paper released last month, China has claimed that the ultimate goal of the BRI is to help a global community of shared future, and makes clear that its ambitions of an alternative world order led by China. So, can you tell us how are foreign governments and institutions responding? Where do you see BRI in another 10 years? Over to you, Neva.
I'll keep it under 1 minute and make a very clear point. I think that many countries around the world have realized the problems of cooperating with China. So the global community that Beijing speaks of is incredibly small, particularly when we look at the BRI forum and the attendance, the head of state attendance this year has been extremely small, and particularly in Asia, there are not many Asian heads of states actually attended in Beijing. So my small prediction would be that in the coming 10 years we will see much more Chinese engagement and outreach in regions outside of Asia. So particularly I would say in Latin America would be China's focus, because in Latin America they unfortunately they still haven't understood as much as the Indo-Pacific region what Chinese investments can bring to their region.
Dr. Prashant, let's hear your perspective on this. Thank you so much, Neva.
I think in 10 years down, in the next 10 years, and from here onward, basically, I would say that we will also see, I will not, international community's response already Dr. Neo has already covered. I would say from Chinese point of view, from Chinese side, I'm trying to see it. We would see some reassessment and some real reassessment. Maybe there may be scaling down or cutting down on large scale projects. They may cut down on risky investments. They may be now really concerned about the profitability because already 10 years have elapsed. So even if the projects are long term, so they must have made some mid-term assessment because 10 years are a long time. So they may be cutting down on risky projects. And this now it is becoming very clear. See, for the sake of strategic and security considerations, they are not going to power their money, as we have seen in the case of Sri Lanka. They will, and from the point of view of strategic utility and importance for China, they will prioritize the country. Not in every country they will pump money only for the strategic reasons that I can visualize, and maybe they may be more responsive towards the international criticism of debt trade, environment sustainability, etc. So that kind of assessment, as much as adjustments, as much as they can, I think they will make, and they will try to bring this BRI more closer to the GDI, the concept of GDI. That in the positive territory of the thing BRI, I am trying to visualize that if I were a Chinese policymaker, in what direction I would like it to move.
Thank you, Dr. Prashant. Tenzilatullah, let's hear your perspective.
Yeah, so I'll be brief here again. So when we are talking about global community that China is promoting, I think it's important to actually understand what do they mean by global community and what kind of global community are they imagining, right? So earlier I forgot to mention again here that when China is talking about global community, it is interlinked with what they call an alternative world order. And what do we mean by alternative world order when China is speaking of BRI and all? I think when through BRI, China is extending this investment agreement across the world. And China is also promoting this. That is very important. China is also promoting this idea that China is actually coming out for just business. And when it means business, it doesn't get involved with, like human rights violations or issues regarding, internal matters, what they say. So we are imagining a world of China's global community in which we don't speak about all these issues. We don't speak about human rights. We don't speak about whether there's a freedom of religion or whether there's a freedom of speech and whatever. They are just here for business. It's not. So they are promoting that kind of idea, and we can understand how it is now being responded, how it is now being challenged by international communities, and particularly by US and EU and India, as I mentioned earlier. They came up with their own idea of BRI, with US B3W and EU have a global gateway, direct challenge to BRI. So again, the last question, in order to answer the last question, how I see BRI in 10 years, I think it is again a very difficult to answer this question since BRI itself is not constant, as I mentioned earlier. It is changing, it is constantly changing. But what is important here is that how will the Chinese people inside China will think about BRI itself? Will they support this Xi Jinping's pet project, which is both expensive with A and expensive with E in nature? Will they support this expensive quest in future 10 years? That will be the larger question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to all our distinguished panelists for the invaluable expertise on China's Belt and Road Initiative. Your perspective has definitely deepened our understanding towards this topic, and it has been clear that BRI is more than just an economic pathway, and it's not just an economic pathway, and instead it's a multifaceted strategy. Thank you to all our viewers and to everyone who has been a part of this discussion. And before I end, I would like to tell you that the video of the session will be uploaded on Asia Freedom Institute's website at www.asiafreedominstitute.org, and please follow Asia Freedom Institute's Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn pages for more information and programs on Asia Freedom Institute. And once again, I'm grateful to each panelist for contributing for today's discussion. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to continuing these important conversations in future discussions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.